We have a field of 68, and now the fun begins. Kevin Sweeney, Brad Cavallero, coming to you from the CBB Central podcast. Brad, we had a selection show yesterday, and it was a little odd. We embraced alphabetical order to release teams, but we have a field of 68. Syracuse is in the field, which, to the surprise of many, Oklahoma State, Middle Tennessee State, a few that got snubbed and left out. Notre Dame, the last team out of the field, or the first team out of the field, however you would like to put it. Just a crazy selection show, kind of following it through. I had a tough time kind of figuring out what was happening exactly with the at-large teams. I thought for a second that they had left Nevada out because they went to NC State before Nevada. Realized then they were just counting NC before NE. But for a second there, I was worried. What were your kind of thoughts on that process, and then kind of going into the podcast more in focus? What were your thoughts on the whole field of 68 selection from the committee?
Yeah, so I thought that the 10 minutes of going through the automatic qualifiers was the single most excruciating moment in television history. I mean, it was
so bad.
I mean, I guess, if you are watching the selection show, either you pretty much already knew like 66 of the 68 teams, or you had like no idea. So for the people that had no idea, I guess, that's some good education for them on who won the conference tournaments. But for the diehard fans like us, it was absolutely, mindless, pointless. But the alphabetical one, I kind of embraced the strangeness of it. When Arizona State was one of the first teams selected, that was very exciting. I think we got to like halfway through the alphabet before I realized that Baylor had already passed in the alphabet. So it was definitely interesting trying to alphabetize all the bubble teams in your head as fast as you could.
Yeah, I felt like I needed to be a little more prepared with like a set list of bubble teams and places in the alphabet I should be looking for, because I would hear a name and I'd be like, wait a minute, that means that team's out. And it was just kind of all scrambled. I was trying to tweet my thoughts as it happened. It was just kind of difficult. I completely agree with you on that whole automatic bid point. On the automatic bid point, I would like to shout out Brad. He was on the first page of 17 in the Jerome. Just another reason. I was on page 4. Just another reason you should be listening to our podcast. We do a great job picking teams, at least we hope. Hopefully we continue that luck through Selection Sunday, and we'll certainly have some picks for you as this podcast rolls along. Brad, I think the most controversial selection throughout this, at least on Twitter and on social media, has been the addition of Syracuse, also Oklahoma to a lesser extent. I know Charles Barkley kind of went all in on the committee chairman about Oklahoma being 2-8 in their last 10 or something along those lines. And so what were your thoughts on those two selections in particular over teams such as Oklahoma State, such as Middle Tennessee, such as St. Mary's, such as even Notre Dame?
Yeah, so I wrote a piece like the 3 most surprising teams to make the field. And I went with Syracuse, Oklahoma, and Arizona State. But, you have to point out that looking at Oklahoma and Arizona State's resumes, there was no way that they were getting left out. The only way that they would be left out is if, they focused on those last, like how both teams finished, which is not something that the committee looks at. And, if you eliminated the dates, like when they won the games, and just mixed up the results of their resumes and took the names Oklahoma and Arizona State off, everyone would say that those were NCAA tournament resumes. I mean, Oklahoma had one bad loss, and it was at Iowa State. They had a win at Wichita State. They had a sweep at TCU. They had so many quality wins that there was no way that they were getting left out. The benefit of Oklahoma playing in a league such as the Big 12 was they didn't even have a chance to really pick up bad losses. Every loss that they had was a reasonable kind of outcome. And in terms of Syracuse, their whole profile was the 14th best non-conference strength of schedule, and then they had a road win at Miami. That was what got them in. I kind of wish Middle Tennessee got in because there's just so much outrage on Twitter, and I think we could talk a little bit more about Middle Tennessee later, but I think that they've become the single most overrated team in the history of college basketball. But I would I would have liked to see Middle Tennessee in over Syracuse, just to kind of quell the masses.
Yeah, I think you make some interesting points. I think the one thing I think that was really interesting to me about the Syracuse resume, I saw this brought up, was the idea that basically they were they were the team that didn't have something wrong with, like, glaringly wrong with them. Like, obviously, Wake Forest and Georgia Tech aren't good losses, but being on the road and against ACC foes, they weren't losses that the committee was going to dock them too hard for. All of their metrics were in reasonable range, unlike a team like Oklahoma State, per se, that had really awful metrics. Their record against groups 1 and 2 were a little better than, say, Louisville's. With the wins over Clemson, the win over Buffalo is a little nicer than you might think. Those road wins at Miami and at Louisville, as well as then the home win over Virginia Tech, and then Maryland and Toledo as well. So I think from that perspective, just kind of the idea that they were the lesser of many evils on that front was interesting. I just found myself frustrated with Oklahoma State because it felt like the only reason they weren't in the field was because of their RPI. Their RPI hovered at, I believe, around 90. Trying to pull it up right now as we speak. But it's just a challenge with Oklahoma State, because when you look at the resume, that's an NCAA tournament team, and when you watch the games, that's an NCAA tournament team. Unfortunately, their RPI of 90 leaves them out because they played such a weak non-conference slate, partially to their own fault and partially to the fault of the teams they played, if you will. But I just thought it was a glaring, not for them not even be in the first four out, was a glaring statement by the committee that we still value the RPI pretty strongly. Because when you look at their other metrics, 90 in the RPI, but the other two result-based metrics, KPI and strength of record, 47 and 44. Now, obviously, those aren't terrific, but they're pretty good. They're right on the bubble. And then when you look at the predictive metrics, BPI has them at 58, KenPom 56, Sagarin 47. It becomes an interesting challenge for me when the only metric that's bad is the RPI, which is docking them for beating teams comfortably that they should have beaten. It's just a tough hurdle for me to get over as a fan. Although, I mean, I can't. I don't want to question the selection of Oklahoma. I think they should have been in. Arizona State, I think you had a bit of a case that they shouldn't have been in. Although, as you said, those two high-level wins probably do put them in somewhat safely. Middle Tennessee State, I think, is another team we can kind of get into here real quick. Left out. I went on a pretty long Twitter rant about it this morning, not necessarily criticizing the committee for not putting them in, but more just kind of breaking down my thoughts on, if the committee isn't going to put teams like this in, how do we move forward with D1 basketball when a team that goes 28-5, or whatever Middle Tennessee State's record is, or something ridiculous like that 12 road wins, they went 24-7 on the season, excuse me. A team like that can't get in, and now you're hearing Kermit Davis might go to Ole Miss. We saw this last summer with Keith Gambrot leaving for Duquesne. These coaches aren't going to want to stay if they can't get in that large bid, and I think it further creates this gap between the haves and the have-nots of college basketball.
Yeah, I totally agree with Middle Tennessee, especially where it's, with St. Mary's, obviously they didn't play anybody, but Middle Tennessee had the 9th best non-conference strength of schedule, and I think that people have been overrating them so much, but like this tweet from Mark Adams, who's one of my least favorite college basketball analyst personalities, is like the definition of like misleading stats, where he's like, Syracuse is 4-6 on the road, Oklahoma's 2-9, and Middle Tennessee was 12-1 on the road. Well, only 3 of those 12 road wins were against teams in the top 130 of the RPI. And if we want to frame a new stat, Middle Tennessee was 1-4 on neutral court, while Syracuse was 2-2 on neutral court, and Syracuse's 2 losses were to Kansas and UNC, who are 2 of the top 5 teams on the seed list. So it just shows that you can frame these stats however you want to make a team look good or bad, and that's why when people were all excited when the committee said that they were going to consider metrics like KenPom, I had the exact opposite reaction, because it just gives the committee another way to kind of shape the narrative in whatever way that they want, where you could include a team because they have a good Ken Palm, or exclude a team because they have a bad Ken Palm. But, a team with a bad Ken Palm could get in and they say, oh, well, they have these great quality wins, or they're great here, or they have all these road wins. So the more things that are brought in, the less transparency and the less consistency I think that we're going to see from the selection committee, which, the RPI obviously has its problems. Like Oklahoma State played Wichita State, Texas A&M, and Florida State in the non-conference, and they had a bad non-conference strength of schedule. That doesn't make a ton of sense, but at least everyone knows how to game it. Everyone knows how it works. Everyone knows that it is emphasized. So I think that is a positive aspect of having a consistent metric.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I really do agree with you on this idea of bringing more metrics into the game. I think it's important that these metrics are at their disposal, but as you said, they get used in ways, for different teams for different reasons. If we're going to say, oh, the RPI is the reason why Oklahoma State isn't in the tournament or even that close, well, St. Bonaventure has an RPI of 24 compared to the RPIs of in the late 30s, early 40s for the other first four teams. Why isn't St. Bonaventure getting a bye? Well, they had one bad loss. Well, yeah, but they also went 9-4 against quadrants 1 and 2. But their Ken Palm was 69. Like, you can frame so many different arguments as to why St. Bonaventure should be an 8 seed versus St. Bonaventure shouldn't even be in the NCAA tournament. I saw a thing that was comparing the resumes of, I think it was Oklahoma State and Florida State, and how similar they were. Florida State on the 9 line, Oklahoma State out, mostly due to that RPI number. It's just there's just so little transparency with the process. I do appreciate Rasmussen. I think he did a good job as a committee chairman of being open with the media and kind of getting out there what was happening and what's discussed. I thought he did a good job with social media. Him and David Warlock, who is like one of the NCAA media representatives, he was tweeting a lot throughout the process, which was I think welcomed and benefited all of us as the college basketball community. But overall, once again, it's just a tough thing for me to understand where the committee comes from year after year, and I don't see any clarity coming.
Yeah, and I think another concerning thing that David Warlock said, I think Eric Haslam actually tweeted him, what kind of things that the committee looks at, and Warlock said that they check out bracket matrix, which is literally the last thing that they should look at, because the point of bracket matrix is to predict what the committee will do. So the committee is looking at people predicting what they will do. That makes literally no sense.
Yeah, I saw that as well, and I was kind of puzzled by it. Also, because bracket matrix is kind of like an all-inclusive community where people can post their brackets. Like, I don't think there's much of a vetting process to get your bracket on bracket matrix. It basically be like them saying, yeah, we go on Reddit and look up the bracketology thread and just kind of read what people had to say and decide who we should put in that way. I thought that was pretty ridiculous to read. Not that I don't respect the work most of the voters on bracket matrix do, and I think I do think that if there's going to be change in this process, I think it'd be good to speak to a Joe Lenardi, a Jerry Palm to a lesser extent, because I don't know that he does that great a job with his brackets every year. An Eric Haslam who knows the statistics, and Ken Pomeroy, and these people should be in the room as the NCAA makes these decisions in terms of changing the way this process goes. I think once again we saw this year that there's a long way to go. Obviously, I feel like every year there's some sort of tweak, and then everyone has renewed optimism that it will solve the problems of the selection committee. And then every year at the end, we say, well, how did that team get in? This is ridiculous. We need to change the system again. I think we need more systematic change, but I think that's something we can kind of get into at a later time.
Yeah, and I think it would even be better if the committee looked at like a bracket matrix of what people think they should do. Like even like Joe Schmo, who has like the 90th best bracket, like his unqualified basketball opinion. I think like even getting like an aggregate of qualified and unqualified opinions of these teams would be more useful than the aggregate of what they think that they will do. It's nonsense.
It is absolute nonsense. I completely agree with you there. But we could rant about the selection committee all day. Let's kind of transition to a little bit more of the fun stuff. Probably the reason why you're listening to this podcast. And that's to help you out with the opening weekend of the NCAA tournament, really your entire bracket. let's start right up in the top left corner, the South Regional, which will be in Atlanta for the Sweet 16 and Elite Eight. Virginia, the number 1 seed in this one, but it's certainly a loaded regional. You've got the 2 seed of Cincinnati, 3rd seeded Tennessee, who gave Kentucky quite a game in the SEC championship. 4th seed Arizona, who I think a lot of people think is a little bit underseeded. Kentucky on the 5 line, they're playing their best basketball, and then some underrated teams like Nevada, Loyola Chicago. This has a chance to be a really fun regional. I said it as soon as the regional was announced that this one was loaded. Brad, kind of what are your thoughts on this one? And do you have any picks that you'd like to make for the regional champion?
Yeah, so I think like in terms of the first round, I think the biggest potential upset pick is Loyola Chicago over Miami. I think everyone has this. I know I'm a Providence fan. I was praying that we got matched up with Miami in the first round. This, like, whoever Miami was going to play, Miami definitely has the resume of a 6th seed, but I don't think that they're anywhere close to that good. They were a couple bounces away from, maybe even being in the first 4. They almost lost to Boston College. They stole one, I think, at UNC when UNC played one of their worst games of the season. So I think that that's one of the biggest examples of a team that their capabilities doesn't match their resume. In terms of who I think is going to win this all, I have Virginia coming out ahead in this region. Kentucky is a intriguing pick, but it's always worth checking yourself when you want to pick a hot team from a conference tournament to advance far. I don't have any stats to back this up, but I don't think that there's a ton of correlation between conference tournament success and NCAA tournament success. And I think the sleeper team would be Tennessee. They have a lot of versatile pieces. They go like 8 or 9 deep. A lot of veterans. They can shoot threes. Grant Williams is one of the best power forwards in the country. So that's an interesting second option there.
Yeah, I mean, I got into this a little bit on my live show. If you guys check that out last night with myself, Tony Patelis, Eli Betker, who's been on this show, and Rocco Meller, another bracketologist. We kind of just went into each region. I think, as you mentioned, the Loyola Miami matchup is super intriguing. A lot of people are going to pick that upset. I certainly am. I think it's a great matchup for Loyola because the one area that Loyola isn't great is they're not elite in terms of interior defense. Cam Krutwig is a freshman big man who's really solid down there and is an excellent offensive player, but they don't really have a backup for him. They play Andre Jackson at the 5 when he's off the floor. He's more of like a 6'5" scat big who can kind of like make plays in the mid post, shoot the 3 a little bit, take it off put it on the deck. So getting matched up with a team that doesn't necessarily have the size is certainly helpful. DeJuan Huell is kind of the one big guy who Miami does go to. He's a solid player, but not a guy who you're going to throw 2 on the block every possession and try to, feed him up and try to get post looks. So I think that's a good matchup for them in that regard. A team that I think, especially with Bruce Brown not going to play in this game, is it's a tough matchup for Miami, I think. And Loyola is a really talented team. They have excellent guards. That's going to be a fun game. I think that game could get up in the 70s or 80s if the pace gets pushed. Even though Loyola does play pretty good defense, I think this game could get up and down and has a chance to be really, really fun. I also think the Nevada-Texas game is one that I've gone back and forth quite a bit because I think there's reasonable reason to pick both squads. I like Nevada's offense, and I don't know that Texas has the firepower to match up there. But at the same time, I question Nevada, especially without Lindsey Drew. They haven't been quite as good recently. And then you combine that with the fact that Nevada struggled against San Diego State, who has kind of that similar length down low with Malik Pope and Cameron Rooks and Jalen McDaniels. Now he had to go against probably the best rim protector in the country in Mo Bamba. That's a challenge for me. Right now I have Nevada, although that pick may change. As for coming out of this region, I tweeted out my bracket this morning. It's Virginia because they are my eventual national champions. I just think I trust them late in games to make shots. I think Arizona, Kentucky could be a really fun game leading into that Virginia game. And I certainly think that both of those teams could certainly knock off the Cavs, but it should be, I'm picking Virginia. I've kind of been on them all year and no reason, they haven't proved me wrong yet.
Yeah, so I actually picked Buffalo over Arizona, just mainly mainly because when picking a bracket, you need some like upset diversity. Where you don't want to pick all the 12s over the 5s. So I needed at least one 13 over 4, and I thought Buffalo has like high major athleticism and could maybe hang with Arizona's athletes. But in terms of that Nevada Texas game, I think you really hit the nail on the head with Nevada worthy of a 7 seed, but without Lindsey Drew, they're probably more of like a 10 or an 11. So this is a pretty even matchup. And if Bamba is healthy and good to go, I know he had like a toe injury recently. I think Nevada could have a really tough time around the rim. They have excellent athletes for the Mountain West, but Texas has Kerwin Roach and Matt Coleman and all these very athletic guards who could be pretty disruptive.
Yeah, if I'm Nevada, I kind of like my draw just because you don't really have to see a blue blood in terms of that deep team with all the athletes and size until probably the Elite Eight. Because I mean, you look at it, if they can beat Texas, then they play Cincinnati or Georgia State. I actually think Georgia State could give Cincinnati a game. I'm contemplating changing that pick and just putting in Georgia State because of like the high upside of it in terms of I don't have Cincinnati getting past the Sweet 16. I'd have them losing to Tennessee in the Sweet 16. So kind of like get that upset diversity, if you will, grab that 15 seed over 2, kind of get that credibility if you win that one. And if you lose it, you don't lose too many future points in the bracket. But in terms of, you'd play Cincinnati, who's another team that's physical and defends well, a team where if Nevada can control tempo and hit shots, like if Nevada hits threes, they can beat anyone in the country. And I think their matchups line up well for that. So if they can control tempo in that game, then potentially Tennessee, maybe Miami, or even Loyola Chicago, another set of teams where if they can hit threes and control the tempo, they can win that game. So I think the draw is pretty favorable for Nevada. I think they have a lot of work to do in terms of getting healthy. They've got, not only do they have Drew's injury where he's out for the year, I believe Kendall Stevens has an injury that he's fighting. I think Jordan Caroline broke his pinky. There's a bunch of really tough little injuries that are nagging this club, and it's not a deep team, which isn't beneficial. But I think the draw is there for a potential deep run for Nevada if they can. Each game is individually tough, but I think overall the path is something that you would have liked if you're Eric Musselman.
Yeah, I would agree because I think that Cincinnati is probably the weakest 2 seed. The thing going for the Bearcats is that they don't lose to teams that, or at least up to this point, they've handled all like the average to below average teams that they've faced. I think they've only lost two NCAA tournament teams. I think another kind of popular upset pick that I'm not a fan of in this region is Davidson over Kentucky. I think a guy like Peyton Aldridge, he's an excellent 3-point shooter, but he also does a lot of work like around the post and kind of using like his craft and like his size for his position, to score around the basket. And Kentucky, thrives with their long athletic power forwards, who could potentially shut him down like a PJ Washington or a Wenyen Gabriel. So I'm not as high on Davidson as most people seem. I think that they are a good team, but this is a bad matchup for them in my opinion. And then something that I didn't realize until this morning was that Creighton Kansas State game is the Marcus Foster Bowl. He started his time at Kansas State and then transferred to Creighton. So that's an interesting matchup that I kind of wish that the committee did more of that with like within seed lines, try to create like the most compelling matchup on purpose, in order to even get like 1 or 2 additional viewers that would be compelled by that.
Yeah, that's a good call. I think on the Kentucky Davidson one, when I originally heard the announcement call, I was like, wow, that is an awful matchup for Davidson. This is a team that can overwhelm them athletically. This is not an athletic Davidson team. They're crafty. They run their stuff. They make good passes. They're efficient. And the more I thought about it, the more I said, I kind of like this matchup. Now, I haven't picked the upset. I might change that. Right now, I'm leaning towards still picking Kentucky. But I think the matchup is reasonable because, McKillop's such a good game coach. I think Davidson, what they're going to do is they're going to just run their offense and throw as many smoke and mirrors at Kentucky as they can in their offense. In terms of, I think they're going to they're going to do a lot of cutting, a lot of moving off screens, and just do a lot of things that disciplined veteran basketball teams do. And I think that has a chance to really challenge this Kentucky team because they're so young, because they haven't been in that situation, in that environment, especially in, your first NCAA tournament game. Nerves are flying. You might be a little anxious, ready to try to make too big a play. And that's when things like backdoor cuts and little moves like that are really the most effective, especially when you weigh in the fact that you do have a guy like Kellen Grady and a guy like Peyton Aldridge, two guys who are elite at creating offense for themselves and for their teammates. So I'm intrigued by the matchup. We'll see. I got to talk to some more people, look at the numbers a little more, but I actually think it's not as bad of a matchup as I thought at first thought on paper.
Yeah, I'm just worried that, I think during the St. Bonaventure Davidson regular season finale game, Davidson relied so much on Kellen Grady creating his own shot, and Kentucky can throw like Shai Alexander at 6'6" at him, and then as we talked about before, with all those power forwards to throw at Aldridge. I think that running your stuff can it is obviously effective when you do it as detail oriented as Davidson can do it, and we saw during the first game, I think Kentucky's first game of the season, where Vermont gave them a scare with a similar detail oriented, a lot of screening, a lot of cutting offense. But I just think that Kentucky's length will be able to mitigate Davidson's usual advantage, which is having those two excellent offensive players.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting matchup. I think you brought a great point with Shai. I think that's a tough matchup for Grady. It'll be certainly a great test for, I think, one of the guys who's kind of asserted himself as one of the stars of March already with this performance at the Atlantic 10 tournament. Brad, anything more you want to touch on in the South before we transition across the bracket? Let's go east to Villanova and the East Regional. Anything more on the South?
Nothing in particular. Well, I don't think that Creighton or Kansas State really stands a chance against Virginia.
Yeah, me neither.
So that's every matchup that we touched on, I guess. So
yes, I believe it is. So heading to the East.
I'll let you go first with the East because I went first with the South. So what stands out to you here in the East?
So my kind of bold prediction in the East is that Marshall beats Wichita State. This is it's a little out there. I just think it's an intriguing matchup for me because they have two guards in John Elmore and CJ Burks who are just so tremendous at not only creating off the bounce but hitting shots, and that's so key against Wichita State. This isn't the best Wichita State team defensively. Landry Shamit's not that good of an on-ball defender. Neither is Connor Frankamp or Austin Reeves when those guys play, and they do get a lot of minutes. So from that perspective, I think it opens the door for those guys to really create some offense and put some pressure on this Wichita State team to score. And then when you have a big man like Eugene Penova, he's very skinny, but he blocks a lot of shots. It'll be a really interesting matchup with guys like Shaq Morris and Rashard Kelly. I think he can handle him down low, and I think he can protect the rim enough where it provides them an advantage in this ball game. So I'm kind of picking that one as kind of my out there 4-13. I didn't love any of the 4-13 upsets, but that's the one I like the most. Kind of going another for my champion of this region. I actually have Purdue as of now. Kind of have to think about it because I like this Purdue team a lot, and I think they match up well with a lot of different teams. But I can understand why a lot of people don't necessarily trust them to make a deep run in March.
Yeah, I'm not as high on Purdue. I really like Vincent Edwards as a player, and Haas has even grown on me. But guys like Carson Edwards who just fire and they shoot a ton of contested shots, and the team really relies on their shot making. I'm just not a huge fan of. Texas Tech has a lot of really versatile pieces. I think that they could maybe even neutralize Haas. I know when Ohio State solved their Isaac Haas problem, they used Andre Wesson, who's like a 6'7" combo forward who just really fronted and battled against Haas. So Texas Tech has plenty of long athletic players, whether it be Zaire Smith or even Zach Smith, who's now back. I'm not sure if Zach Smith's 100%. He's been coming off the bench, but he would certainly give Haas a more athletic look. And if Texas Tech can go small, they could maybe force Haas off the court, which could give them a major advantage. Obviously, assuming that Texas Tech and Purdue play in this matchup. But what was I gonna say? And then Tommy Hamilton, can really shoot the ball, so he could even pull Haas out. So I actually really like a Texas Tech over Purdue in that potential Sweet 16. But I do think that you really hit the nail on the head with Wichita State, where last season they were a 10 seed and they were top 10 in KenPom, and everyone banging their fist. How can a team top 10 in KenPom be a 10 seed? They literally return everybody. They moved to a tougher league. They're now 20th in KenPom, kind of showing that maybe last year they shouldn't have been they shouldn't have been a 10, obviously, but maybe they should have been like a 7. So their pieces have kind of been overrated. As you mentioned, guys like Shamet and Frank Camp have not looked as good in the American as they did in the Missouri Valley. And a guy like Marcus McDuffie, either he's not completely healthy from his early season injury, or he's just kind of neutralized by the better athletes in the American. But I think that Wichita State could definitely be ripe for an upset. I just didn't really feel comfortable picking Marshall over them. Marshall was the 4th place team in Conference USA. They can really score, and I really like Ajin Panava. I think he's even generating some NBA draft buzz. But like just as more like a safer pick, I went with the Shockers here.
Yeah, and I can get that. The other matchup, I think this is a pretty interesting matchup out in San Diego. Not only that Wichita State Marshall game, but also the West Virginia Murray State game. Right now, I'm rolling with Murray State, and I'm rolling with West Virginia. Excuse me. I want to pick Murray State. I worry about a freshman in Ja Morant having to deal with so much pressure on the ball. My guess is he'll get Javon Carter. Even though John Stark might be a little bit better at creating his own shot, if I'm West Virginia, I put Javon Carter all over Ja Morant and introduce him to real D1 basketball, if you will, and really physical him up and see how he handles that challenge. What are you seeing in that 5-12 matchup? Because I'm kind of leaning towards West Virginia as of now, but I think Murray State certainly has the talent to pull the upset.
Yeah, so actually I had the same exact thought process as you, where coming into Selection Sunday, I wanted to at least consider Murray State for an upset. But, with Murray State relying so much on, guys like Stark and Ja Morant and West Virginia having like the best perimeter defense, the most physical perimeter defense, and Carter, who's definitely top 2 in terms of perimeter defense, I can't see how Murray State can pull this off. I think that they could put – I agree to put Carter on Ja Morant and kind of rattle him in terms of who should cover Stark. A guy like Wesley Harris, who's really long, could maybe contain him and disrupt him with his length. Same with a guy like Issa Ahmad. So they just have so many different guys that they can throw at Murray State, and Murray State's not the deepest team in terms of who they rely on. Were there any other interesting matchups that you considered, Kevin?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple of ball games that I'm really looking forward to. So I think the 8-9 game with Virginia Tech and Alabama is one that I wanted to touch on, as well as that Florida St. Bonaventure UCLA pod. But kind of starting with that Virginia Tech Alabama game, what do you like there? Because I think it's a good matchup for Virginia Tech in the respect that Alabama's not a team that's going to threaten you with size and post you up. That's something I was concerned about, would be handling bigs if I'm Virginia Tech. But at the same time, Alabama's going to have the best player on the floor and, one of the better players in college basketball, a guy who's elite at creating his own offense, in Colin Sexton. So what are you seeing there? I actually switched my pick mid-show last night to Virginia Tech from my original gut pick of Alabama.
See, I have Alabama. Alabama's a team where I think, people thought that they were worse than they are because they were racking up losses. But in Alabama's late season 5-game losing streak, they were all to top 7 teams in the seed. Like they lost to Florida, Arkansas, Texas A&M, Kentucky, and Tennessee, I think. So the losses, like the loss total, I think gives people like a misconception of Alabama. I think that they're definitely capable of even upsetting Villanova because they have a lot of long athletic players. Guy like Herbert Jones and John Petty are kind of future NBA guys. I think the key for Alabama, besides Sexton obviously hitting shots, is if Dante Hall is healthy. He had like a nasty concussion I think it was the Alabama Auburn game, where he like smashed his head on the floor after jumping on a pump fake. But he's such an important like defensive and rim protector piece, who could neutralize Kerry Blackshear for Virginia Tech. So I think as long as Hall's healthy, I think Alabama should advance to Villanova, where they could even scare the Wildcats.
That's definitely a really excellent point with Hall. I think he's really important to what they do. I like Dan Giddens, but I think Hall is really the guy who makes an impact there. And then this first four matchup of St. Bonaventure, UCLA, two teams with tremendous guards. Will take on the winner of that game. Will take on Florida. Brad, who do you like in first of all the play-in game, and then who do you like in that game potentially knocking off Florida, maybe even making a run here? I have the Bonnies, and then knocking off Florida as well.
Yeah, so I know that a lot of Bonnie fans are upset being in the first four, which I understand, but they were just a victim of the bid thieves. When I was doing my bracketology on Sunday, there was no way to keep them out of the first four as hard as I tried. So, I think that they are definitely better than first four caliber, but I also think that UCLA deserved a much higher seed. And with Courtney Stockard, not sure if he's going to play for the Bonnies. He got hurt in the Atlantic 10 tournament, and I think that UCLA is a superior team. They have, the Bonnies' main advantage is their guard play, but I think UCLA has even better guard play. With Aaron Holiday and Jalen Hands is like a very athletic, very very promising player, and then I love Chris Wilkes for UCLA. He's like kind of a small forward, like a wing kind of scorer who can put the ball on the floor. He could be a matchup nightmare for that smaller Bonnies team.
Yeah, that's definitely tough. Is that matchup with Holiday, because I think they put Matt Mobley on Holiday. Holiday is so good. I think you're gonna let him get his because he's gonna go get buckets. But at the same time, if Stockard's healthy, he's so key to what they do because he's kind of the 6'6" wing who can do a lot of different things off the bounce. He does things in the high post. They also have Ladarian Griffin, who's just kind of athletic combo forward who does a lot of different things for them defensively, kind of their glue guy. So it's definitely a really tough matchup for me to pick. And I think either team I'm going to pick to beat Florida, but at the same time, I can see Florida making a run to the Sweet 16, maybe in the Elite Eight, because they're super talented and can beat anyone when they hit their shots. It's just a matter of will they.
Yeah, I have no idea what to do with Florida. They're a team where they were preseason top 10, and I was vehemently against that. I had no idea why they were preseason top 10. Then they soared up to like number 4, and I conceded. I admitted I was wrong, and then they kind of fell to like maybe missing the tournament, and then they went back, and then they slipped late, and now they're up to a 6 seed. Kind of an underrated roller coaster season. Most people think about Arizona State and Oklahoma for the roller coaster seasons. I have no idea what to do with Florida. I think if UCLA beats the Bonnies, I'll have UCLA beat Florida, but not the Bonnies to beat Florida. I'm a big Chris Chiozza guy. Jalen Hudson's very streaky, and guys like Kavarius Hayes haven't really developed as much as I thought this year, and like Kayvon Allen too. I think Florida could really succeed with using Keith Stone at the 5 instead of Hayes. So that could be like an interesting matchup to watch.
Good call there. I think Florida is definitely, as you said, just kind of an up and down team. You never know what to make of them. They're so 3-point reliant, kind of the poor man's Houston Rockets, if you will, except they're playing Chris Chiozza and Jalen Hudson and Kevon Allen instead of Chris Paul and James Harden. So a bit of a step down there, which causes their kind of inconsistency, which is what kind of makes that whole bottom half of this East regional bracket so wide open to me because you're looking at, Florida's a team that can make noise. Texas Tech can make noise. Stephen F. Austin's a team that's pulled upsets in the past. Maybe could give Texas Tech a challenge if they're not healthy and they look over at Stephen F. Austin. Arkansas and Butler are not teams I see making a big run. But Purdue is a team that's certainly talented. I have no idea. I could see a lot of ways coming out of that little bottom pod. I'm going to roll with Purdue for now, though, to come out of that and actually come out of this whole region to go to the Final Four.
Yeah, I'm going with Villanova as they're also my pick for the national championship. I just love Brunson and Bridges, and I think that they're really really skilled players. I think another underrated possible matchup similar to the Creighton-Kansas State game is the Brandon Francis Bowl between Florida and Texas Tech if the second round gods let us have it.
Wonderful. Yes. So I think Brad should write an article over at Busting Brackets of listing all the potential matchups of like former coaches, former transfers. Just track that all up for us, put together a list so that we can have names for all these games. It would be good stuff.
I think I get maybe 25 views.
I would retweet it, so try to get it out to my audience. Anyway, down to the Midwest, Kansas, the host of this regional, as the number one overall seed. I think the first question before we get anywhere is Penn actually going to beat Kansas? Because Ken Palm kind of threw us into a frenzy because Penn is apparently the best 16 seed via Ken Palm in like 6 or 7 years. I believe I read they give Penn like a 10% chance to pull the upset, which everyone took to there's no way Kansas can win this game. Penn is going to win by 20. So we're kind of going to see there. Do you think Penn has any chance of pulling the 16-1 upset? To me, it's the one that you look at as the possible 16-1 in this field.
Yeah, especially because Kansas is so 3-point reliant, and as a bookie might not be full strength. But you would have to be really really reckless and not want to win your pool to actually pick the 16 over the 1. That's one where if it happens, you just got to take your beating and try again next year. I don't think that in any circumstance should someone pick that 16 over the 1.
Good call. Yeah, I would agree. I was trying to think if UMBC had any sort of puncher's chance at Virginia just because they have guards who can make shots. And then I kind of thought, how is Jarius Lyles playing pick and roll isolation and going to the rim going to work against the pack line defense? And I decided it probably wouldn't go so well. So I think they'll probably score about 30 points and Virginia win by 20. But, we'll see. If Jarius Lyles goes for 40, they might win. So 16-1, maybe not the year for it, although I do think Penn has a sliver of hope that they could pull the upset. This is a really, really fun regional for me. My bold prediction from it is New Mexico State goes to the Sweet 16. I think just the matchups are really nice for them, whether it's the location with being in San Diego against Southeast opponents, and then the potential to play Clemson and Auburn instead of, say, some of these other 4 seeds like Arizona or West Virginia on the 5 line, some teams that would have been tougher matchups. I think the matchups line all right for New Mexico State to pull some upsets here. What are you thinking of a potential Sweet 16 run for the Aggies in year 1 of Chris Jan's era?
So I see your Sweet 16 New Mexico State, and I raise you a Seton Hall Elite 8.
Really?
Yeah, I'm going to die on this hill. In the preseason, I had Seton Hall as the 9th best team in the country. I felt a little betrayed. They lost some pretty bad, pretty tough losses. But I think, Kansas is probably the weakest 1 seed. I think I need to have some sort of seed diversity with a one seed going down early. I'm going with Kansas. Seton Hall has the size, and I think that they have the firepower to pull off an upset as long as Desi Rodriguez is healthy. In terms of the intrigue of this quadrant, I think you really hit the nail on the head because Clemson is depleted because they don't have Dante Grantham. Auburn doesn't have Macklemore. TCU doesn't have Jalen Fisher, and then you have 2 of the best non-1 seeds in Michigan State and Duke, who could possibly, and in my opinion, probably will face off in the Sweet 16. So I think that there's just a huge chance for both upsets and compelling heavyweight matchups here.
Yeah, I think you make some very, very solid points. I think, to me, I actually like North Carolina State to beat Seton Hall in round one. I agree that that's the 1-8-9 matchup that I think could beat the 1 seed. I actually don't like the 8-9 matchups for beating a 1 otherwise. But I think NC State's a really tough matchup for Seton Hall because of the pressure they put on. Seton Hall's weakness kind of in that ball handling category. A lot of pressure on a guy like Kadeem Carrington, a lot of pressure on a guy like Miles Powell to handle pressure, and NC State will come with it for 40 minutes. I think they could beat Kansas as well. So I think it's not a bad choice, certainly, the idea that there could be an upset there. I think that's the most likely 8-9 to beat a 1. I just think NC State with the way their guards are playing, especially with Markel Johnson, this is just a different team with him around and the way he's played, especially down the stretch. One of the better, pure passers as well as kind of a defensive catalyst. As far as the bottom of the bracket, I kind of come down to this central question of, can a Duke team led by Trayvon Duval at point guard be a national title contender? And if you believe that the answer is yes, then I think you put them in the Final Four, and I have them in my Final Four, which is tough because I don't necessarily believe in Trayvon Duval. I just, in a one-off matchup between Michigan State and Duke, which I think is what it's going to come to, I think I have Duke. I think their bigs are going to be too much to handle for not only Michigan State, not that Michigan State doesn't have the bigs to handle them, but I think just Bagley is such a difference maker. He wasn't even there for most of that Michigan State game early in the season, and then against Kansas as well. The combo of Bagley and Carter is such a tough matchup for Bill Self.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening. Just the thing with Duke is they just waste so many possessions because of their lack of depth, where they have to resort to this 3 big lineup where you have Javin DeLaurier playing the 3, and he'll catch the ball wide open at the 3-point line, and he can't do anything with it, and he just takes a couple dribbles and goes into a dribble handoff. I think another potential problem with Duke, as you pointed out, Trayvon Duval is not very good. I don't think. He was a guy who had kind of lottery buzz in the preseason. I think he's completely fallen out of the first round. He's just such a non-threat in terms of shooting the basketball. And then the thing with Duke also is that Grayson Allen plays a lot of hero ball. I know in the game against UNC on Friday night, they were, I think, down 3 and with like 6 seconds left, he like triple clutched and like faded away when he could maybe find a teammate and then even gotten the ball back with that much time. So if Allen's not hitting shots, I could even see Duke. No, I'm not going to say it. I was going to say I could see Duke fall to Oklahoma or URI, but I'm not going to go there.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that we'd have like a good 7-10 matchup to match up against Duke. Like, for instance, if we were sending like Texas A&M Providence winner to Duke, I'd be a lot more intrigued by an upset possibility there. Neither team is playing good basketball right now, and I wanted to talk about this game a little bit. I'm picking Oklahoma. I think Trae Young is the best player on the floor, just like he is in pretty much any game in college basketball this season. And URI is just not playing good basketball right now. The free throw shooting is a major concern. They just didn't look good in the A10 tournament. They found their way to the final. They feel like a team that hit their peak, and now they have these moments in games where they find it again briefly, and they're able to make a run. And usually that's enough against A10 competition, but against a team like Oklahoma, I just don't know that they have enough to win that ball game. So I'm rolling with Oklahoma to win that ball game. I think Duke handles whoever wins that one fairly comfortably, though, heading into that potential dynamite game in Omaha between Duke and Michigan State. I tell you what, if you are someone who pre-bought tickets to the regional final or regional semifinal in Omaha, you are going to be making a lot of money in the secondary market, because you have Kansas fans, Duke fans, and Michigan State fans all likely trying to get to the game. let me tell you, that would be a sight to see for your StubHub account.
Yeah, when I went to the NCAA tournament 2 years ago, there was Duke, Wichita State, Arizona, and Miami all there. So there were a ton of Duke fans, but once a Duke game ended, they all vacated. So like the second game looked like practically empty.
Yeah, Duke fans are everywhere. Same with Michigan State. I know a good friend of mine went to when Michigan State was in Syracuse playing. It was the year they had, like, I think NC State was in their pod as well for a regional final. And they said that the Michigan State fans were just nuts out at the Carrier Dome. So, from that perspective, it's gonna be nuts on the ticket market. Obviously, in Omaha, pretty close by to Kansas as well. Their fans certainly travel as well as any. Brad, any more matchups you wanted to look at? We still haven't really gotten too much to Michigan State's first round matchup against Bucknell. I just don't really see Bucknell having the firepower to match up with Michigan State. And then the Auburn and Charleston game, I think, is pretty interesting. I'm picking Auburn, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Cougars stole it. What do you think there?
Yeah, I went with Charleston. I think most of the damage to Charleston's profile came when Gerald Brantley was out of the lineup. So I think that they're probably a little better than a 13. And Auburn's been slipping lately. McLemore was probably like their fourth or fifth best player, but he was just so important to what they did that like his loss, seems to have made a bigger impact than I would have realized when the injury occurred. So I have Charleston winning that game against Auburn. Auburn doesn't have the size to kind of overpower a mid-major team like a typical high major 4 seed could. So that's another point in Charleston's favor. And then TCU was a team that I wanted to have lose in the first round prior to the bracket, but I mean, you can't pick Arizona State over TCU. And Syracuse, I think Syracuse is a better team than they get credit for, but that's the definition of hero ball with Frank Howard and Tyus Battle just throwing up contested shots. Their defense is excellent, but I suspect that a TCU would pull that one out. And then I also had Oklahoma over URI. The one thing working in URI's favor is that they have a lot of quality perimeter defenders, so they could throw a bunch of different looks at Trae Young. They have a guy like Fats Russell, who's like a smaller kind of Nat kind of defender, whereas Jared Terrell is like a big physical defender, and Stanford Robinson is kind of a longer and a more athletic defender. I think the reason why URI got kind of overrated is because Andre Berry was playing amazingly in the first part of the season. I think he's come back to earth a little bit. Then EC Matthews, he's just someone who's been so overrated his whole career from when people had him in the first round of NBA mock drafts. He's just not that level of a player. He's a good double figure scorer, but he's not the kind of star that people made him out to be.
Yeah, people still don't realize that Jared Terrell's like pretty clearly the best player on Rhode Island, and like I'd be sort of inclined that Fats Russell's the second best player, or Jeff Doughton, probably Jeff Doughton, and then Fats, and then Stan. Like on the order of guys who are the best players on Rhode Island, like I might take EC like fourth or fifth. Like he's super solid, but he's just not the same player, especially after the injuries. I mean, obviously felt bad for him when he got injured again earlier this season. I was worried that, his career wouldn't end in the way it should. And certainly a senior who's meant a lot to that program. But at the same time, like I completely agree with you there that he's certainly become an overrated player in this landscape of college basketball.
Yeah, I think I'd go Jared Terrell 1, Stanford Robinson 2, Jeff Doughton 3 in terms of the URI hierarchy.
Very good stuff there. We have one more regional to break down for you before we go to some Final Four hot takes. Xavier, the first seed out west. This was kind of the one seed that was still a sliver of doubt, but Xavier does get it. I've got a pretty hot take, although it's not that hot. I thought it was a hot take when I filled out my bracket, and then I saw everyone on Twitter doing the same thing. I was like, well, damn. That would be Gonzaga going to the Final Four. I think to me, they're the best team in their top pod. So they just have a matchup with North Carolina at the bottom, which is kind of the team I have coming out of that bottom area. And to me, Gonzaga is dangerous in that regard because Gonzaga's got the size, whether it's Jonathan Williams, Killian Tilly, even Rui Hachimura. in Zach Norvell's long as well. I think they have a chance to kind of pound UNC on the glass a little bit, which is kind of the one weakness of this North Carolina team. So I have them going to the Final Four. Any thoughts on that or on the region as a whole, Brad?
Yeah, so I like Gonzaga a lot. And while I think that Xavier is the better team, I did pick Gonzaga to win that Sweet 16 matchup just because I'm always so tempted to go number one seeds. I always have to check myself and throw in some of these later upsets. Gonzaga has a really excellent front court. I know that Killian Tilly has been like shooting the absolute lights out recently, and then Jonathan Williams is very underrated, and then Hachimura is a great spark plug off the bench. I could honestly see that Xavier Gonzaga matchup going either way. I don't think that Missouri or Florida State can hang with Xavier. I think Xavier's usually pretty good at beating average teams. I know they lost twice to Providence, but Providence is a bad matchup for them where they can throw multiple wing defenders at them, and Missouri's probably going to be without Jordan Barnett, giving them
they're out. No Barnett. He's confirmed suspended for game 1, maybe game 2.
Yeah, because I couldn't see him just missing one game when the second game is 2 days later. So I think Missouri wouldn't have the length to match up with Xavier, and while Florida State does, I think Florida State's has become one of the more overrated teams. Their whole resume I think is based on a home win over UNC and then a win at Florida. So I think that even as a 9 seed, that might not reflect how good that they actually are.
Yeah, can we talk about how dumb Jordan Barnett is? I know, obviously, we don't need to get into too much legalese, but getting arrested for a DUI the weekend before the NCAA tournament seems so incredibly stupid. Like,
and he's in their right
mind? Like, are you kidding me? Like, you don't need to party the weekend before the NCAA tournament. You can take one weekend off, and you can certainly get a ride home. My God. I saw that news, and I was just like, like when you hear news where like someone did something, and you're just like, you're just floored that someone was that dumb. I am absolutely floored by how dumb Jordan Barnett is to get a DUI the weekend before the NCAA tournament.
No, anyway, it's absolutely crazy.
Anyway, I don't want to get too riled up there. 5-12 upset for me in this pool. I've got South Dakota State beating Ohio State. I've kind of went back and forth because my first thought I was like, I love this pick. I've seen some people kind of saying maybe it's not the right choice, making some valid points about the matchup with Ohio State's athletes. I think Jenkins for South Dakota State, the freshman, is super huge. He has to be able to kind of create off the bounce and be a penetrator, get some space for their shooters. If South Dakota State's going to win this game, I want this 5-12 to happen. I'm going to pick it with the way the South Dakota State's team play. They just run such good offense. What do you like in that 5-12 game?
Yeah, so this was my 5-12 upset as well. I don't really have anything against Ohio State. I think that they're a solid team, but in terms of the fives, I thought that this was the best opportunity to pick a 12, and I kind of have mostly favorites really well of late, and they have a veteran team, and then I thought Michigan and UNC were clear picks to advance to the Sweet 16, so I kind of just took my shot here. Mike Dom versus Keita Bates-Diop is a pretty compelling matchup, and as I was saying earlier in the podcast, these are things that should be more regular occurrences, like targeting specific storylines in these first round matchups, as long as it doesn't affect the seed list.
Yeah, some excellent points there. I am totally unable to make the pick. Houston versus San Diego State. I actually think both could give Michigan quite a game. I actually right now have Houston winning that game and then going on to beat Michigan, just because I love Rob Gray and I think this team is super underrated still. What do you like in that 6-11 matchup? Because to me, it's as tough as any matchup to me in this whole bracket to pick.
Yeah, so these are two teams that are playing really well, and it's a shame because you have like the URI Oklahoma matchup with two teams that aren't playing well, or like the TCU Arizona State matchup, kind of in that same vein. Um, so it's tough because I really like some of San Diego State's pieces. I think Jalen McDaniels is going to be like a really impressive player when he's an upperclassman. I just had to go with Houston. I watched them play over the weekend multiple times. You know, I really like their like 3-point shooters. You know, Corey Davis, Armani Brooks, and then they have Rob Gray, who's one of the best scorers in the country. So it was very tough to pick against Houston for me. And then in the last matchup that we didn't touch on, I think it's an absolutely horrible matchup for Providence. I'm going to pick them just because that's where I went to school, but you know Texas A&M is going to kill them on the glass, and Providence can't use their positional size to their advantage.
Yeah, I'm interested that you say that because I certainly was thinking about the size of Providence not being a factor, not having not being deep up front, having to deal with Robert Williams and Tyler Davis. But at the same time, Texas A&M has kind of limped their way into the field. Even as a 7 seed, they just haven't really been an impressive team to me for most of the season, especially with their guard play now. I mean, being so reliant on Starks. I have Providence as well in this ball game because I think their guards will make enough plays to win them this ball game. I think Alpha Diallo is super talented. I like Kyron Cartwright a lot. We've talked about him a few times on this podcast. I think their guards are just so good that they can win this ball game still, despite that front court disadvantage. Although I think it's a pretty big toss up of a ball game.
Yeah, I was just so disappointed because I think Miami or TCU or NC State or even Arkansas would have been a really favorable matchup for Providence, but they do a lot of work posting up their guards and having like a rim protector like Robert Williams, and then they can't really crash the offensive glass. They do a great job of like their wings crashing the offensive glass and getting easy stick backs, and they have not shot the three ball well since non-conference play. So specifically, their shooter Jalen Lindsey was 0 for 7 in the Big East Championship against Villanova from 3, and he's a guy who they need like 3 or 4 threes a game from. He's not been the same since he suffered a concussion like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I mean, it's a kind of disappointing. I don't want to get too down before the game's even played, but it's definitely not looking promising, especially because UNC, in my opinion, is the best 2 seed, and I have UNC playing in the championship. So there's a limited window for Providence to advance.
Yeah, it's certainly tough, especially as Providence, made such a nice run in the Big East tournament. They were kind of playing their best basketball at the right time. Certainly going to be, I think, one of the more fun games of opening weekend, that Texas A&M matchup with the Friars. Last thing on this NCAA tournament preview, we've kind of went through our Final Fours. I'm going to start with my matchups and then pick my champion. Then we can send it over to Brad for his. So I have Virginia coming out of the South, as I said. The West, I have Gonzaga. The East, I have Purdue coming out, and then they'll match up with Duke out of the Midwest. I have Purdue beating Duke, playing Virginia in the title game, and Virginia winning that ball game to become the national champions. I still have to do some looking because I'm still not quite sold on that Duke pick or that Purdue pick. Pretty confident in Virginia, pretty confident in Gonzaga as well to make it to the Final Four. Brad, what are you looking at so far? We got a couple more days till the games get started, and you got to finalize these picks. But what are you liking early?
So I have Virginia versus UNC in one Final Four matchup, and I have Villanova and Michigan State in the other. I have Villanova beating UNC in the championship. This is something that I was planning on doing before the brackets even came out. I think UNC, even when UNC plays poorly, I still feel like they're a good team. And then Villanova has just been so impressive this year, and they have such a great point guard and such a great collection of guards, and they have one of the most underrated big men in the country in Omari Spellman. So I'm someone who, even if my bracket is bad, I can still root for an upset, even if it contradicts with my bracket. So I'm I'm not too tied down to any of these teams, which always makes March Madness, a fun experience for me no matter what.
Yeah, I think that's always something that I focus on is if Georgia State's beating Cincinnati and I pick Cincinnati, or even if I like even if I pick like Purdue to go all the way or to the national championship game as I have, and Cal State Fullerton has a lead on him in the second half, you had better believe that I am all of a sudden the biggest fan of the Cal State Fullerton Titans you have ever seen. I will be wearing their colors. I will be running up and down the street if they win that ball game. It's the best time of year for sure. And I definitely root for the upsets beyond just rooting for my bracket. And I root for the storylines as well. I think there's going to be some really fun storylines, a lot of good seniors in college basketball, whether it's Grayson Allen, whether it's, some of these veterans on Virginia, whether it's Joel Berry, who I think is a unique chance to solidify a legacy at North Carolina, whether it's, Trayvon Blewett at Xavier, Jalen Brunson, who is graduating this year, likely on his last ride at Villanova. It's going to be a really, really fun tournament. Any final takes on this podcast, Brad, before we sign off?
Nothing too crazy. I just like pointing out that I always root for the upset in the first round, even though it's going to give us worse games later on. That's future Brad's problem. To watch. I remember specifically like the Florida Gulf Coast when they made the Sweet 16. They played Florida, and Florida like mopped the floor with them. But it was such a fun ride for them to even get to the Sweet 16. And then, even if you lose a few teams early, you could still make a run. One of my friends, this was three years ago, the year that Georgia State beat Baylor and UAB beat Iowa State. My friend had both those teams in his Final Four, and those were two of the first three games of the tournament. He lost two Final Four teams and ended up in third place in our 50-person pool. So it can be done, even how bleak it seems after one day.
Yeah, I'll share a couple of fun bracket stories before we sign off. I'll say the first one is that, as you said, I feel like I can never land both all the good upsets early and the champion. 2 years ago, my bracket was in, I think I picked like 28 or 29 of the first 32 games correctly. I was on a roll. I had Stephen F. Austin over West Virginia correct. I had the Little Rock upset. Like I had pretty much everything nailed. And then my bracket went haywire in the Sweet 16 Elite Eight. And then contrarily, last season, I whiffed on every upset that I had picked. But then at the same time, I crushed it with my Final Four. I believe I had the championship game correct, which placed me second amongst my friends once again. And then my other fun story for all of you guys who would like to make fun of me is the year of Phil Pressey and Frank Haith leading the way at Missouri. I picked them to win the national title, and they lost to Norfolk State and Kyle Quinn in the first round. It was devastating. I don't think I'll ever recover quite from that moment in time as a college basketball fan, seeing the team that I had picked and thought I'd done the research that was the best team in college basketball. To win the national title, losing as a 15 seed in the first game.
Yeah, I remember that year. All of my friends, we all had Missouri in the Final Four. We watched them lose. We go out to dinner. We're coming back, and we're hanging out, and we see that Duke is losing to Lehigh, who we all, or like most of us, had in the Final Four. We all just ripped up our brackets. It was just, but I remember that year. Wasn't South Florida like in the Sweet 16 that year?
There was somebody really weird in the Sweet 16. Let me try to pull it up real quick.
Stan Heath.
There was some weird stuff going on, and I think it was 2012 NCAA tournament.
Either 2012 or 2013.
Let's pull it up real quick and see what we can find. This is the year that Kansas won the national title. Let's see. Let me try to find this bracket.
Yeah, that was the Trey Burke year, right?
Yes, I believe so. Just trying to find the bracket. Can't get the bracket. Yeah, this was the year. So Lehigh won that game. Baylor went to the Elite Eight and lost to Kentucky. VCU was in the second round. They had beaten Wichita State and then lost to Indiana. Trying to find some other things of note. New Mexico was a 5 seed that year. Murray State was a 6. That was the year they went like nearly undefeated. There was some weird stuff in that NCAA tournament. Wow. Yeah, South Florida played that was the year that Ohio made the Sweet 16 as a 13 seed because they beat Michigan, and they drew South Florida, who was a 12 seed and had lost and beaten Temple in the first round. And so that's how Ohio wound up in the Sweet 16 before playing North Carolina quite close, lost by 8.
That was the Kendall Marshall broken wrist, right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
What a great tournament that was. Hoping for some more madness like the 2012 tournament. Feels like we're due for a wild one. Not that they aren't always wild. We're going to sign off on our NCAA preview podcast. Also check out our NIT preview podcast. I know there's plenty of our followers who have a team in the NIT or enjoy watching the NIT because they're basketball junkies that have nothing better to do for the next 3 days. We'll have a preview of that as well as some kind of coaching change recaps as well. There's been a couple of moves, so we'll have that as a separate podcast. So check that one out as well. Enjoy your first weekend in the NCAA tournament, and we will be back on breaking all of that down later this week.